I was crouched behind the counter of the little music repair shop, fumbling with the strings of an old acoustic guitar, when I heard her voice. My neighbor said, "I heard you playing music again," she said, leaning lightly against the doorway, the late afternoon sun brushing gold across her hair. The corner of her mouth tilted in that faint, amused smirk I'd somehow memorized from the few times she'd peeked into the shop before. I froze, partly because the words carried a softness I wasn't expecting, partly because I realized I'd been hoping she would come over. So I said it, without thinking really. "I was hoping you'd come over." Her eyes widened, just for a heartbeat, then narrowed with a teasing sort of caution, like she was weighing whether to laugh or scold me. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. I could hear my own heart thudding above the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, and even the faint squeak of the swinging door seemed louder than usual. She shifted her weight, brushing a hand along the edge of the counter, and for a second, the air between us seemed to vibrate, like one of those strings I'd just tightened. She wasn't someone who asked for attention, and yet somehow, she had it all the time I was around. There was confidence in the curve of her shoulder, in the way she stood just slightly apart from the cluttered instruments, like she belonged both in and above this small, dusty space. I cleared my throat, trying not to look too eager. "I didn't mean, my hands trembled just a little, though I forced them to keep adjusting the strings." She laughed, low and steady, and it wasn't mocking, but it made me want to stop speaking altogether. Instead, she leaned a bit closer, enough that the faint scent of her perfume, something warm, with a hint of jasmine, slipped past my defenses. She glanced down at the guitar, her eyes catching mine for just a second longer than necessary. "You're hopeless," she said softly. But the way her lips quirked hinted at something else, something unspoken. She touched the edge of the guitar lightly, brushing against my fingers, and I wanted to memorize the warmth of that contact. I realized then that this wasn't about music at all. It was about the pull between two people who shouldn't know each other like this. And yet, somehow, they did. Every casual glance, every brush of hands, carried a kind of electric tension I couldn't ignore. She straightened, tilting her head as if considering something, then smiled in that quiet, confident way that made me feel like I'd been caught somewhere between boldness and foolishness. "I might stick around for a while," she said, and then, as if to prove she could vanish just as easily, she stepped back toward the doorway. I wanted to tell her to stay. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I watched her leave the shop, the golden light following her like a halo, and I found myself thinking of that moment over and over. The awkward pause, the teasing, the way she made ordinary sunlight feel heavy with possibility. Even now, hours later, the memory lingers, like a single note held just long enough to resonate in the quiet. And I keep asking myself, quietly, what does it mean that I can't stop thinking about the way she leaned just slightly closer than necessary? I didn't expect to see her again so soon, but there she was, leaning over a dusty workbench with a tiny screwdriver in her hand, trying to wrestle a stubborn guitar tuner back into place. "Need a hand?" I asked, keeping my voice casual, though my chest tightened the second she looked up at me. She hesitated, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, her lips pressed together just slightly, like she was weighing how much of herself to show. "I've got it," she said, but her fingers trembled, betraying a small, quiet frustration. I crouched beside her anyway, careful not to crowd her. "Maybe just one extra pair of hands," I offered, reaching slowly. She didn't move away, but she didn't relax either. I could see the way her eyes darted, scanning the room as if to remind herself of boundaries she hadn't fully set. As I held the tuner steady, I caught a glimpse of her hands. Long, elegant fingers, slightly calloused at the tips, the faintest hint of a scar on one knuckle. She flexed them in the light, a subtle reminder of how much she gave, how much she held back. I wanted to reach out and trace the lines of those hands, but I didn't. I only let myself notice. Her laugh broke the tension unexpectedly when the tuner finally clicked into place. A short, surprised giggle, not loud, but perfectly imperfect. And just like that, she softened for a moment, and I felt like I'd caught her somewhere she wasn't supposed to be caught. She leaned back, brushing her hair again, and for the first time, I noticed the shadow under her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged like she carried a little more than just the day's work. I wondered what had happened earlier, what stories those quiet traces told. "Thanks," she murmured, not meeting my eyes, and there was something in the tone, hesitant, almost fragile, that made me want to step closer, even though I knew better. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with something unspoken, something I couldn't name, yet felt with every breath. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume again, warmer now, mingling with the faint tang of guitar polish. "You always make it look easy," I said finally, testing the waters, and she lifted her gaze at me, brief, sharp, and then away, like a cat deciding whether it could trust a stranger. For a moment, I thought she might speak, might explain something, anything, but she didn't. She only gave me a tilt of her head, the faintest curve of her lips, and I realized that even in her guardedness, there was a pull I couldn't resist. She gathered her tools, brushing dust from her hands, and for a split second, our fingers brushed, not intentional, not bold, just a whisper of contact. My stomach lurched, and I had to look away, pretending to busy myself with the workbench. She stepped back, and I watched her in the way I never admitted to anyone, noticing everything, remembering everything. The way she moved, how her laugh lingered in my ears, how tired she looked but refused to let it show. And as she left again, just a sliver of daylight following her out the door, I could still feel the ghost of her hand against mine. The brush of her fingers, soft and fleeting, stayed in my chest long after she was gone. I whispered to myself, almost unconsciously, "I shouldn't, but I can't stop thinking about it." The rain tapped softly against the tall windows of the repair shop, a muted rhythm that made the whole room feel smaller, closer. She was perched on a stool, leaning over a stack of sheet music, her glasses sliding slightly down her nose. I was beside her, organizing a pile of guitar picks, though I barely noticed what I was doing. "You really know your stuff," I said, trying to sound casual. My hand brushed hers as I passed a tuner, and she froze for a split second, her eyes flicking up to mine. That pause, short, almost dismissive, but not quite, made my stomach twist. She cleared her throat. "You'd probably think I'm weird if I told you I've been playing this same piece every night for weeks." Her voice dropped just enough for me to catch it, a whisper of confession that made the air between us electric. I wanted to say something, anything, but stopped. Instead, I just nodded, watching her fingers trace the sheet music like she was afraid someone might take it away. The tension hummed in the room, unspoken but heavy. Then her phone buzzed sharply on the counter, breaking the spell. She glanced at it, her face tightening, and I caught the name on the screen before she slipped it away. Daniel. Ex-boyfriend, or maybe just a reminder of something complicated. She didn't answer. I didn't ask. "Everything okay?" I said softly. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, just old habits." She laughed lightly, brushing the hair from her face again, and I realized I was holding my breath without noticing. We worked in silence after that, the storm outside growing louder, rain drumming against the tin roof. Every small movement she made, tilting her head, leaning closer to read the notes, brushing against my arm, felt like it carried weight it shouldn't. My hands ached to do something, anything, but I restrained myself, gripping a wrench a little too tightly, pretending the noise of metal calmed me. At one point, she shifted on the stool, her knee brushing mine. We froze for a heartbeat, eyes locking, and the room seemed to shrink around us. I could smell the faint hint of her perfume, warm and subtle, and the air between us felt like it had condensed into something almost solid. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something. Maybe a confession, maybe a joke, but just then, the shop bell rang. She straightened instantly, distancing herself as if the moment had never existed. I wanted to ask her what she was going to say, but the words lodged somewhere in my throat. Instead, I watched her tuck the sheet music back into its folder, the brief warmth of her knee against mine fading like a pulse. My fingers itched to reach for her hand again, to stop time just for a second, but I didn't. I only noticed, only remembered, and only felt the quiet sting of longing. The storm raged outside, lightning casting quick, sharp shadows across the room. And in that flicker of light, our faces almost touched, almost, but not quite. I felt the magnetic pull, the impossible closeness, and then she was stepping back, taking the space she always claimed, leaving me with the echo of everything that didn't happen. I exhaled slowly, whispering under my breath, so close, and yet. We sat on the worn leather couch in the corner of the shop. The lights dimmed low because the day had stretched long and the storm had passed into a drizzle. She had her hands folded neatly in her lap, and I was leaning forward, elbows on my knees, pretending to busy myself with the frayed strings on a guitar, but really, I was watching her. You ever feel like you're just circling around something you don't want to name? I asked, voice quieter than I intended. The words hung between us, heavier than the humid air. She didn't answer immediately, just looked at me, eyes steady, tired, impossibly patient. Sometimes, she said finally. The single word made the air feel fragile, like one wrong breath could shatter it. I swallowed. Because I can't stop thinking about this. About you, about. My hands twitched, unsure where to rest. About whatever this is. She didn't flinch, but there was a small tightening at the corner of her eyes, a subtle sign of her own restraint. And what is it? Her tone was calm, almost clinical, but I caught the undercurrent of fear, the kind you feel when you realize something could change everything. I laughed softly, nervously. I don't know. That's the problem. She leaned back slightly, brushing her hair from her face, and the light caught a faint line beneath her eye, shadows from a day she hadn't bothered to hide. It's ridiculous, she murmured, more to herself than me. I shouldn't care this much about this. About anyone. Her voice cracked on the last word, just enough that I could feel it in my chest. I wanted to reach out, wanted to touch her hand, but I stayed frozen, watching the micro-expressions that betrayed her armor, her lips pressing together, the slight tremor in her fingers, the way she avoided my gaze for a fraction too long. I keep thinking, I whispered, if I just stayed quiet, if I just pretended this didn't exist, maybe it would go away. She tilted her head, the faintest smile appearing, but it didn't reach her eyes. Maybe, she said softly, but it never does. We sank into a silence so thick it felt like it pressed against our chests. No music, no tools, no background noise, just the lingering heat of unspoken things. Every glance, every tiny movement became amplified. The space between us was not empty. It was full of all the words we hadn't said, all the confessions we couldn't risk. I don't know what we're doing, I admitted finally, voice almost breaking. And maybe we shouldn't even be doing it. Her eyes softened, and she shook her head just slightly, a gesture that carried more weight than any argument. I don't know either, she whispered, the vulnerability raw and unguarded. The storm outside was gone, but the tension inside felt like it could rain for hours. She rested her hands in her lap, silent but trembling ever so slightly, and I realized that no touch, no word, could make this easier. And then she said it, quiet enough that I had to lean in to hear. I'm scared I'll lose myself if I don't stop caring. I wanted to answer. I wanted to argue. I wanted to close the distance between us. But instead, I just watched her, felt the weight of her honesty, and understood that some truths can't be fixed by words alone. I was stacking sheet music when I noticed her lingering near the window, staring at the raindrops sliding down the glass. There was a softness in her posture today, a quiet I hadn't seen before. You ever regret something so much it feels like it's still living inside you? She asked suddenly, voice low, almost breaking. I froze, mid-movement, sensing the weight behind the words. Sometimes, I said carefully. Depends on what you mean. She turned, and I saw it then. A flicker of old pain in her eyes, the kind that wasn't about this room, this storm, or even me. I lost someone, she admitted, as if saying it out loud could make it less heavy. Years ago. Thought I'd gotten over it, but, she trailed off, shoulders slumping slightly. Her hands folded tightly in front of her, betraying the effort it took to hold herself upright. I wanted to say something comforting, something clever, but all I could manage was silence, my gaze caught in hers. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure it was the right thing. Then I noticed the small photo on the counter, a faded picture of her sitting on a park bench, smiling with someone I didn't know. She followed my glance. "That was a long time ago," she said softly. "I didn't think it would matter anymore." I picked it up gently. "She looks happy," I said, meaning the person next to her. "You look like you were really seen." Her lips pressed together, the faintest quiver. I thought I could forget. I thought I was moving on. But sometimes, the past, it just waits for you to remember. The room seemed smaller then, quieter, filled only with the sound of our breathing and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. I wanted to reach across and touch her hand, but I didn't. Instead, I just let my eyes linger, memorizing the way she carried her sadness with such quiet grace. She sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face, eyes catching mine. "I've kept things inside for so long," she admitted, almost a whisper. "I don't know if I've been brave or foolish." I swallowed hard, feeling my chest tighten. "Maybe both," I said gently. "But it doesn't make it wrong to feel what you feel." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, I could see her vulnerability, unguarded and raw. "You make it seem easier," she murmured. "Like someone finally notices, not just looks, really notices." I couldn't stop staring at her then. The way the light fell across her face, highlighting the small lines that told her story, the faint tremble in her hands. Every detail seemed amplified, every moment electric. She reached for the photo, holding it close for just a second longer than necessary, as if reluctant to let go. And then, quietly, she placed it back on the counter, looking at me with a softness I hadn't earned but was suddenly desperate to keep. The silence that followed was heavy but tender, and I felt something shift inside me. Not a confession, not a declaration, just the recognition that whatever walls we'd built, whatever distance we'd maintained, had begun to crumble in the gentlest way. And as she stepped back toward the door, turning slightly with that subtle tilt of her head, she whispered, "I didn't think anyone could understand." And in that single, fragile moment, I knew I already did. The shop smelled faintly of polish and rain as I watched her move between the instruments, her fingers brushing lightly over the strings like she was remembering something only she could hear. I hadn't realized how long I'd been standing there, simply observing, letting the quiet between us stretch and settle like dust in the sunlight. She paused, glancing over her shoulder, and for a moment our eyes met. Not with teasing, not with hesitation, but with the soft, unspoken acknowledgement that whatever this was, it had been growing quietly, irreversibly. "You ever feel like some things just choose you?" she asked softly, voice almost drowned by the hum of the fluorescent lights. I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I whispered. "And you can't ignore it, no matter how hard you try." She laughed faintly, almost to herself, a sound that made the tension in the room shimmer and release all at once. Then she sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and I noticed the tiniest tremor in her fingers. Without thinking, I reached out, just enough for my hand to brush hers as I passed a tuner across the counter. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let our fingers linger together for a heartbeat longer than necessary. The warmth of her skin against mine felt like confirmation, silent, delicate, yet absolute. We worked in tandem after that, moving closer without needing to speak. I caught her looking at me a few times, those stolen glances that carried more than words ever could. And I realized that everything we'd held back, the awkward pauses, the near confessions, the stolen moments, had all been leading here, to this quiet inevitability. At one point, we paused, both of us reaching for the same tool, and our hands touched again. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. I could feel her breath, the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders, and the little imperfection of her laugh still lingering in the air from earlier. Finally, she leaned back slightly, resting her forehead against my arm as if it were the most natural place in the world to be. I froze, but didn't move her. My hand settled over hers, a simple, tender acknowledgement that we were here, together, fully aware of what had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. Time didn't need to be measured. The hum of the shop, the soft light, the faint scent of rain, it all became part of the moment, a shared space we inhabited without explanation. No grand words, no sudden gestures, just two people quietly admitting, through proximity and touch, that they had already chosen each other. Her eyes fluttered closed, and I noticed how easily she trusted this, how natural it felt for both of us to finally let go of pretense. The past heartbreaks, the guarded walls, the careful distance, all dissolved quietly in the warmth of this shared stillness. I exhaled slowly, feeling a kind of relief I hadn't realized I'd been holding on to. She squeezed my hand ever so slightly, and it was enough. That small contact, gentle and deliberate, sealed the unspoken truth between us. We sat like that for what felt like hours, letting the world exist outside the door, letting every other worry slip away. No declarations, no promises, just this, quiet, earned, undeniable. And when she finally lifted her head, brushing her hair back and smiling faintly at me, I realized that nothing more needed to be said. The moment itself was enough. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it simply settles, quietly, where it belongs. I still remember that first afternoon, the way she leaned against the doorway, the quiet teasing in her voice, the faint scent of jasmine that seemed to linger long after she left. Back then, I didn't know what it meant, or if it meant anything at all. I only knew that something had shifted inside me, a pull I couldn't explain. Looking back now, I realize it wasn't just about longing or curiosity. It was about learning to notice, to truly see someone and be seen in return. She taught me that intimacy isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's measured in small gestures, fleeting touches, and moments of shared silence that feel like the world has shrunk just enough to fit two people inside it. She's changed too, in ways I think only I got to witness. The careful walls she carried, the old regrets she whispered to no one, the exhaustion from life's weight, all of that softened, not because anyone fixed her, but because we found a rhythm together. A rhythm that let vulnerability be okay, that let uncertainty exist without fear. We didn't need fairy tales. We didn't need declarations. We needed presence. The way we sit quietly, sharing a cup of coffee, or working side by side in the shop, has more depth than any dramatic confession could ever hold. I learned that love, at least the kind that matters, is earned slowly, quietly, and sometimes imperceptibly, until one day, you realize it's already there, in the curve of her smile, the tilt of her head, the warmth of her hand in yours. Sometimes I still catch myself staring at her, remembering how awkward, fragile, and electric those first encounters were. And I smile, because the messy, hesitant, human moments are what made this real. They made us real. And when I tell this story now, I don't tell it for grand lessons or moralities. I tell it because someone out there might be circling a connection, holding back, waiting for permission to let themselves feel. Sometimes you don't need words. Sometimes you just need to be present, to notice, to breathe in the small moments that quietly change everything. She looks at me now, across the cluttered shop, and I realize that everything, the hesitation, the laughter, the stolen glances, the stormy nights, led us here. Not to perfection, not to spectacle, but to this. Two people who can exist together, fully aware of each other's flaws, scars, and histories, and still choose to stay. So if you've ever hesitated to reach out, to lean in, to trust that a connection can grow in silence before words arrive, remember this story. Let it remind you that the small, quiet choices, the ones no one sees, can carry the deepest weight. And as I watch her laugh softly at something small, almost insignificant, I realize I don't need to say anything more. Because love, in its truest form, sometimes only needs to be felt. What's your favorite quiet moment in a connection you've ever experienced? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story.